We'll give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. We have some members who are en route. Welcome, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding Transportation Improvement Plan. It is Friday, August 19, 2022. We are noticed from 11:50 to 12:50 today. It is 11:54. We will start by going around the room with Assembly member introductions. I want to note that Ms. Allard is excused.
Felix Rivera.
Meg Zalatel.
Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LaFrance, and on the phone, I believe we have Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Yes, hi everyone.
Thank you. And Mr. Schultz?
Yes, here.
Thank you. And we have been joined by Mr. Volin. Also around the table, we have
Aaron Yonganailan, AMATS coordinator.
Todd Van Hove, Chief of Planning for DOT.
John Weddleton, interested public.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us here today. I want to note that AR number 2022-254 is posted online. It's also available in hard copy in the room, but if you go to muni.org/work sessions, it will take you straight to the work session page. And with that, I will turn to, actually, we've also been joined by Mr. Peterson as well. I will now turn to Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to the resolution, and then I want to turn to our three guests here, AMATS coordinator, State DOT, and the interested member of the public, Mr. Weddleton, because this really has come about through community concerns and questions that were brought to the Assembly members who are on the policy committee of AMATS. So to back up a little bit, AMATS is our transportation planning that we do, and part of that planning is to administer federal highway monies and other one-time, often federal monies within a designated area. And that area is most of what you consider to be Anchorage, the Anchorage Bowl, and then Chugiak Eagle River. It does not include Girdwood. Those monies are administered through the TIP. That TIP is a fiscally constrained program, meaning you can only have so many projects that add up to so much money. So meaning that if you want to add a project that would take you over that amount, you have to take away something else. The TIP is done for a span of years. So this one is 2023 to 2026. And so what the two assembly members on the policy committee wanted to do, Mr. Dunbar and myself as sponsors of this, wanted to bring this to you because we think there are some changes that could be made to the TIP that more closely effectuate the goals this body has expressed around transportation planning in the municipality. And one of the reasons we wanted to bring it to you all is because these projects have impacts on our municipality, but only two members of the body really get to weigh in on the TIP. Just for your knowledge, the TIP will come before the policy committee on August 25th. So it'll be the Thursday following our next assembly meeting. And then as you see in the resolution, it does reference a number of our locally adopted plans. And that's by design. And again, I think that's another good reason to bring this forward to the body to talk about these amendments. So a lot of these amendments did come from the community. We've had the work of Cheryl Richardson, Nancy Pease, Mr. Weddleton, Mark Begich have all weighed in. They've actually done additional work and spoken with other community members. So what I'd like to do is just run through each of the recommendations and have a conversation about them in the resolves clauses, unless there are any questions on how we kind of got to this point of a resolution. Does that work for you? Okay. All right. So the first one is related to the first resolves is related to greenhouse gas emissions. And this ties back to the climate action plan. I guess what I will do is we've made the recommendation for a change or an addition to the TIP. I think I'll just give an opportunity to kind of go down the line as we go through each of these, because we've already put in what we would like to see the changes in the TIP, but like have the opportunity for discussion so that the body can consider that in advance of considering the resolution on Tuesday night. Does that work for you guys as well? Okay. So Aaron, you want to go first and we'll just kind of go down. If you just want to restate your name for the record as we go. Thanks.
Okay. I'm Aaron Yonganelan. I'm the MPO coordinator. First of all, overall, I just want to point out that all of these changes have already come before the policy committee for some kind of action. Oh, sorry. How is this? Sorry, I'm not too close. All of these items have already come to the policy committee for action at some point. So this is kind of a rehashing of things that they've already made decisions on. So the first one for the greenhouse gas emission reduction plan, it's not a bad idea, though I am concerned how it's stated here. It says for the Anchorage transportation system, and some of the whereases that relate to this are a little concerning because it seems to completely exclude the transportation plan that the Muni has through the CIP, and seems to defer to AMAT solely for transportation planning when that's not really the case because of how the MPO is constructed. The idea of a greenhouse gas emission reduction plan for AMATs is not a bad idea. I'm not opposed to it. I think just the timing is very bad for us because adding projects into the TIP now after we've already done our public hearing, our public comment period, our interagency consultation, and our air quality conformity determination will require us to redo portions of that process and delay us for at least 3 months. So just as a heads up on that, and if the body decides that they want to move forward on these, awesome. These would honestly be better to be looked at in future amendments to the TIP versus trying to do it at the last minute when we're going for approval.
Just go down the line. If you don't have any comment on it, okay, so no comment from DOT.
Yeah, this plan for AMATs, this idea doesn't affect DOT.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on the greenhouse gas emissions? Oh, Nancy, do you want to come grab a seat up here? Sorry, I didn't see you sneak in. When you come to the mic, can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Nancy Pease. I'm a citizen, long involved in transportation and other community planning issues. With regard to the greenhouse gas reduction plan, I don't see that it would require an air conformity determination. It is a plan. It of itself creates no change in emissions. The plan would present policies and strategies that would then have to be adopted. And at that point, you might need to get an air quality conformity. In addition, the time to do it is now because although the Muni has expressed interest in data collection, this is about strategies and policies. Other localities are way ahead on this, and we really need to be having those strategies in place. For example, the municipality of Anchorage transportation system produces 53% of our municipal greenhouse gases. That's far more than many other municipalities, such as Minneapolis, which is somewhere in the 35 to 38% range. Minneapolis has already determined that even with their lower output from the transportation system, they can't get their reductions down just with electric vehicles. So they are ready to make a policy decision. How much do we rely on electric vehicles? How much do we need to reduce vehicle miles traveled? That's the kind of thing we need to be preparing to decide on. But funding this plan will not require an air quality determination. And then another concern has been that, I didn't hear it expressed just now, but this wasn't put forward and scored during the tip scoring. Well, it should have been. It's the kind of thing that staff routinely does in looking at what kind of planning do we need. It has been discussed. It has been raised by the public over months and years. So it's not a new idea. And it sounds as if, fortunately, staff is thinking it is a good idea. So those are the 2 points I wanted to make, or 3.
And I'd like to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Before we turn to the next resolved clause of the resolution, I thought we would pause and see if members have any questions or comments. Otherwise, we'll just move on.
I have a comment. So as far as rehashing maybe work that's already been done as part of a public process, I think what we're bringing forward here is part of what the public has brought to us. And we're hearing loud and clear from many of our constituents that they want to move in the direction of safer, non-motorized travel. In my perspective, when it comes to pedestrians, cyclists, wheelchair users, kids walking to school, we are in the process right now of forming a joint task force between the Assembly and ASD on safe walking routes to schools. And it's of a very timely nature with what we're seeing with our bus driver shortage here in Anchorage right now. I don't think that Anchorage infrastructure, particularly in the urban core, is safe for those user groups. And I think the time is now for bold, decisive leadership, policymaking to push us in that direction. And I appreciate my colleagues wanting to bring this forward and just get on the record, the Assembly as a body. This is our expressed will. And even those members who may not be on the AMATS policy committee should be able to weigh in and give their opinion and a statement of support. So I think that's really the intention here. So I appreciate staff being here and being willing to listen to these considerations and being present, even if it feels like, we've already had these discussions. I think we're bringing this forward because it matters to us and it matters to our community. Thank you.
And I want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Cross.
Okay, let's move on to the second resolves. Change the project title from recreational trail plan to recreational and utility and add to the purpose description, plan for direct, safe, low-stress routes and crossings for utilitarian travel between neighborhoods and community destinations as an attractive alternative to motorized transportation. I want to note, we have 4 other ones after this one, so we're going to move through these a little bit quick, but I'll start with Ms. Pease as to why the change, and then we'll just go down the line here again, if that works for everyone.
Thank you. Again, this is Nancy Pease. The term recreational trails, we feel, may limit state, federal, and even municipal funding sources. There's a common perception, I believe, that transportation is an essential service and recreation is a non-essential service. So that is an impediment, kind of a philosophical or psychological impediment for a lot of people in positions to fund projects. In addition, the pots of money that come forward for transportation are in the hundreds of millions and the billions. The pots that come forward for recreation, they're in the single-digit millions. So there are still trails that we need in our system that were not included in the non-motorized plan that would then go into this recreational plan, but they're in fact commuter connections from neighborhoods to schools, between neighborhoods, from a neighborhood to a commercial center. Staff has said that they have incorporated the pedestrian plan into the existing non-motorized plan. But I'll pass this around. This is the type of mapping that was done for the pedestrian plan in 2007. Basically, it's the kind of sketch you would do in a planning charrette. So what we're hoping here is that this next major plan for trails that AMATS is about to do will not be labeled just recreation trails, but will include utilitarian, or you can use the word commute trails. An example of this is the trail, which is sometimes called the Tour of Anchorage Trail, that connects from Abbott Road through Far North Bicentennial Park over to the UMed. That's used for recreation. It's also the most direct, low-stress route for people going from the hillside to the UMed. So that should be considered part of a transportation network. And in fact, that is in the bike plan already. But it's that kind of connection that we want to highlight as not just for people in Lycra with Fitbits. It's to get kids, elders, people who don't drive, and we want to have the broadest possible community support and funding for that kind of trail. And that's the reason for the title change.
Thank you. Aaron?
So we do need to keep our plan separate. Utilitarian trails were already looked at as part of the non-motorized plan. Community members were given plenty of opportunity to be able to weigh in and provide input. In fact, massive changes were made to that plan based on community input. And when it comes down to AMAT's funding, the majority of AMAT's funding cannot be spent on recreational transportation. It's a limit of the actual federal funding we receive. There's a very small portion that can be spent on recreation.
Can you send the definition of what constitutes recreational to?
There's no definition.
Okay.
And that's part of the
good.
problem.
Oh, okay. That's good information to know.
But
Okay.
the thing is when you start blurring the line between utilitarian and recreational, it's easy to not fund a project because there's concerns that it is a recreational project and it'll violate these requirements to not spend funding on it. This has been done in the past, so we're trying to be careful with it.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Ms. Zalato, Madam Chair, through your delegated authority. So if that's the case, why do we it strikes me that the trails in my district are almost all used by commuters in some way or another. Do you categorize any of the trails in East Anchorage as recreational trails? And if so, why? Why would we limit our funding options?
The Anchorage Area-Wide Trails Plan does have trails in there. I don't have a exhaustive list of every single one of them, but trails that we do consider as utilitarian are the major ones we have, for example, Coastal, Fish, Chester, Campbell, all those ones, plus a lot of any of the other paved ones were already looked at as part of the non-motorized plan. What the rec trails plan is looking at is kind of those additional things like single track trails that are recreational in their purpose. It's not looking at all these other ones that are being used, that are being put like on the side of a roadway that you can clearly show is utilitarian. That's part of the non-motorized plan that's already been looked at. This rec trails plan is that missing piece from the Anchorage Area-Wide Trails plan that was not done as part of the non-motorized plan because it was recreational in its primary purpose.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Van Ho?
Yeah, Todd Van Hove, DOT. Most of what you're referring to again is primarily municipality and trails, and we would not be typically involved in those decisions.
All right, thanks. John? You good? Do you have any more comments? Okay, great. Anyone want to comment or ask any further questions on this number before we move on?
And Ms. Zalatel, I had seen Mr. Constance, you're good, and then Mr. Cross's hand is up.
Okay. Mr. Cross?
Thank you. My understanding, having dealt with trails in my district, is that part of the issue of trail construction and funding these is that the Department of Transportation is not distinguished between many utility and trails and like road improvements, and that there's a very high design standard put on trails that don't nearly have to supply the weight and restrictions that vehicular traffic does. Just looking for clarification if there's been conversations on whether we should have a specific trail standard of code that would make it easier to construct and get some of these projects completed, or is there any code issues that we should be aware of that complicate the issue?
Well, from the planning department, I probably can't answer your question, but I do have specialists here in the room with me, Mr. Baskey, if you would assist us with that, please. If he's allowed.
Did you hear my question? Do you need me to repeat it, or?
I did hear it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
And if you would go ahead, Mr. Baskey, and repeat your name.
Sure. Sean Baskey. I'm the head of the design section for the Department of Transportation. So with regards to trail designs and other aspects, so specifically with some of the trails like the Coastal Trail and things like that, we're working with the Parks and Rec department. And they outline a lot of their guidelines for what they need to maintain a number of those facilities. Just specifically for some of the projects like Fish Creek extension, pathway projects, any of the bridges, we have a designed vehicle that needs to cross some of those to maintain them, whether it be plowing or whatever else. So.
Do you see any, and are you aware of any complications with the way the current code is that's making it more complicated or more expensive to develop trails than is necessary? Would be my question.
No, I don't believe so.
Well, then thank you.
Okay, anyone else before we move on to the next section? I'm going to try to keep this next one brief because I have the feeling the last three will take the most of our time. But Mr. Constant.
So is there any alternative opinion that this section that we're discussing, the recreational trails section, is different than what Mr. Jongno, or I don't know how to say your last name right, Aaron's perspective, right? Because if in fact all of the general use trails are in the non-motorized transportation plan, and these are a separate and distinct category, I know that I would never use the Hemlock Burn Trail, for example, for transportation and to get to work. And so if in fact there is distinction, I would like us to be really clear on that, because it might mean that that move is inaccurate, and we want to be accurate with our resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I believe Ms. Pease would like to weigh in on that. And I think my understanding is that the non-motorized plan isn't fully inclusive because we haven't considered a number of trails for classification as utilitarian or recreational, or, yeah, that was my understanding. But Ms. Pease, am I correct, or am I?
Yes, Ms. Zalatel has it correct. As you heard, the current non-motorist plan relied on the pedestrian plan, and I passed around that little sketchy map. Since then, neighborhoods and districts have done much more detailed plans. These were not, and these are utilitarian trails, many of them along roads. These were not included in the non-motorized plan. There's not that level of scale for the whole Hillside District, and I suspect for other parts of Anchorage too, there will be missing utilitarian trails that have not been included in the current plan. So you stated it correctly, Ms. Salatel.
So if there are trails missing that should be classified under the non-motorized, but are in fact classified in the recreational, isn't a more accurate move to move the ones or identify the ones that are in fact the kind of more transportation oriented trails, utilitarian, than to designate all of those trails? Or is there a distinction? I guess that's a question for AMATs. I mean, ultimately, couldn't we wrap them all into one, or is there a reason to keep them distinct?
There's a reason to keep them distinct because of funding. We need to keep it utilitarian trails, and then we have recreation trails because of the limits of the AMAT's federal funding. Again, this is for AMAT's federal funding. That limit does not exist for municipality or state funding.
What is the process for identifying and incorporating those newer utilitarian use trails?
An amendment to the non-motorized plan, because that's our utilitarian trails plan for AMATs. And I believe that what Ms. Pease is referring to was looked at for the non-motorized plan. It did include all of those things. Joni Wilm, the project manager here, did spend an absolute yeoman's effort getting all of those incorporated in.
Well, it sounds like all of those that were identified by the department, but not necessarily all of those that were
No,
identified by the
identified
community.
by the community councils in their plans. Those plans were looked at and incorporated where possible. So I just want people to understand
Joni.
that we're not saying we ignored these plans.
Okay, so I mean, I will have to think on that, whether I would support those amendments if it isn't in fact hewing closely to reality. So thank you.
I think it'll be something to debate Tuesday night. Thank you. I will just note, to make sure the record's clear, Midtown District does not have a district plan, so there wouldn't have been a document to identify those trails. Next one, number 3, change the project description of the trail inventory to include non-motorized easements, pedestrian right-of-way, and undeveloped right-of-way. So this would be an expansion. I'll just go back down the line either way.
I'm happy to start. When we look at our housing base, for example, we don't just map all of the houses we've already built. We look at what land is available and what ownership and whether it's zoned properly. And that's all we're asking for here. When we do an inventory and a map of non-motorized facilities, let's look not only at what has been built, but let's look at the connections that can be built, specifically platted public easements, tracts that have been created in subdivisions, and rights of way that have never been developed. And these are, undeveloped easements in particular, are depicted on municipal plats. Joni Wilm wasn't aware of that. I had a conversation with her last month, pulled up some municipal ArcGIS, whatever you call it, the map layers, and showed her there are these pedestrian easements that provide excellent connectivity, especially between cul-de-sacs. And these provide shorter, safer, and healthier connections than can be along roadways. And we would just like this data to be included in the mapping effort. It's there. Let's pull it into public view and use it for planning.
Thanks. Aaron?
This is not AMAT's responsibility to do. This is the municipality of Anchorage, as they are the plating authority. Additionally, this has been tried in the past in terms of building projects on these type of facilities. A study you may remember is the Chugach State Park Access Study that was done for the Hillside District that was stopped by the Assembly due to outcry from the community because it was going to be putting these kind of facilities on people's property and they didn't want it. So that study was stopped and was only to be used for plating actions
But you're
in the
saying
future.
this isn't an AMATS thing, so that's
No.
what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a muni, and just so you know, just so you have context, to do an inventory and analysis and putting this into a GIS layer is going to be very expensive because anyone who's ever dealt with platting or easements knows there is constant conflicts that rise up with this stuff. And you have to sort those conflicts out when you put them into a GIS layer to make it available to the public. So this would not be something that could be easily done as part of the rec trails plan. It would have to be a separate plan. If you're wanting to have AMATs do it with a consultant, it would be in the 500,000 or more range.
Thank you.
Todd Van Hove, DOT. Yes, we, again, would not be involved in land that we don't own or operate.
Thanks.
John Weddleton, this needs to be done by someone somehow has identified these opportunities. I know throughout the hillside, there are connections that are platted that are basically invisible. Homeowners, think it's part of their yard or they're just left overgrown. But there are a lot of connections between neighborhoods that city already owns, or there are already easements for trails that would be a lot cheaper than building new trails and buying right away. So this is an opportunity. 500,000 sounds cheap. Thanks.
Questions on this one, Mr. Cross?
No, I just want to speak to that. I will tell you that for the years I sat on the plating board, we established quite a few of these. And any new subdevelopment, and you may not know this, but most of you do, just to get on the record. Anytime a new cul-de-sac is developed, it's required to have an access in the back of the cul-de-sac, which is a public access for interconnectivity, even pre-planning. Even if there's nothing behind there but green space, they have to dedicate a right of way, for future trail access. So, those, they're very well established, but, unless you're intentional about seeking them out, sometimes they can be hard to find. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Anyone else? Mr. Constant?
I would just note that I heard chatter that echoed what Mr. Weddleton just said, that when we contemplate the sheer volume of dollars that AMAT spends, $500,000 to solve a real problem doesn't seem like that much money. Seems pretty reasonable if there's a real problem. And what pops into my mind is maybe we better not do this near the railroad, or maybe we should, and then we can bring that question to a head.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right. Sure, Joni. Why don't you come up? Maybe Sean will let you borrow his mic for a sec. Can you make sure that's on? Thanks.
Green. Okay, on. Yep, Joni Wilhelm here, AMAT's non-motorized coordinator, project manager for the non-motorized plan, and staff to Aaron. I just wanted to let everyone know that we have researched, as Aaron mentioned, the sort of the history behind this effort of including these non-motorized easements, pedestrian right-of-way, and undeveloped right-of-way in planning, such as the Chugach State Access Park Plan. And as he mentioned, this did cause a huge public backlash the last time that they tried to do it in 2015, and the plan was actually stopped. This was because there was property owners who may or may not have known about easements on their own property who were not in agreement with allowing public access. So at that time, the Assembly did pass an ordinance that stated that the subsection of this particular plan shall not be used to implement access to Chugach State Park. No easements, dedications, or improvements to implement access to Chugach State Park shall be required through the land use permit process. So typically, when this is done and the easement is dedicated for public use, that's on a case-by-case basis through the plating authority. And the municipality has the opportunity to look at that particular right of way or dedication and make a determination on whether or not that is justified or fits into the public use. So in the specific effort, they deem the plating authority as the decision-making body that would determine, where these trail accesses are allowed. And so, as AMAT's mentioned, as Aaron mentioned, it's not an AMAT's decision. It literally is not an AMAT's decision that we can make planning or creating policy on where these public easements are. It's not that we don't agree that this is an important thing that should be looked at, but we, in order to do that, we would need permission, express permission and consent by the plating authority to do that and include those efforts in our planning. So while we think it is a good idea, and as John mentioned, Mr. Welts mentioned, it should be done, this particular planning effort may not be the best way to have it done.
Okay, thank you. I have
Okay.
several members in the queue, and I want to kind of finish this one up because I think the next are going to take us some time as well. Mr. Dunbar, then Mr. Volin, then Mr. Constant.
Just really quickly, Aaron or Joni. So the it's like Joni is talking to Mr. Gates. The 2015 effort, who led that Chugach State Access Plan? Who did that effort, that inventory?
It was not AMATS. I'm not sure who led it.
Yes, exactly. I think that's so. What that indicates to me, I think you're right. When someone other than AMATS that has decision authority went down that road, it was very controversial. It seems like AMATS is one step removed. So just doing an inventory without any decision-making authority actually gives you guys a pretty unique ability to be perhaps a little less threatening to folks. And it seems like it failed last time when it wasn't you guys. It seems like that is an argument for you being the best people to take this on.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Volin.
Whether or not AMAPS ends up doing this, it's very hard for me to hear that there's, a fear when it comes to private homeowners. We have issues with public access in Anchorage, whether it's Chugach State Park or the Stewart Trail or Campbell Lake. I personally am not interested in prioritizing the backlash of homeowners over public access. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant, then Mr. Cross.
Ms. Wum, you mentioned an ordinance. Do you have the ordinance number, please?
I do. It's ordinance number 2014-140S.
So the reason I ask is because I'll certainly look at that action, and if it's a code section, I'll investigate whether that's something that can be amended, or if this was an action that took place based on that code that is now final. I don't know. We'll have to look at that. But it seems like if the question is blocked by former actions of the body, then the solution is future actions of the body, unless it's foreclosed.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, if I can just build off of the testimony here, part of the complication that we have is that in real estate, there is no requirement for a buyer to obtain a current as-built or plot plan. They can just purchase the property, and then what you have, and unless it's enforced by a lender, it just doesn't occur, because oftentimes if there's not one on record, it can be $750 to $1,000 depending on the size of the lot. It's an upper hillside lot. So most people just be like, I'll just take the word of the seller, what I've got here, and I got, is roughly where that utility line is, but they don't realize that there may be easements or setbacks within that. And so, as much as I love the freedom of you being able to purchase what you want without the interference of government, there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement or responsibility by the real estate community to make sure that those people who are purchasing properties are aware of what the easements are on that property. Because if you buy it and then are wondering why there's a bunch of people traipsing through your backyard, that's the value of an as-built. It may not seem expensive. It may seem expensive at the time of purchase, but it's much more expensive when people go to enforce those provisions. So that may be something that we look at as whether it's public education and making sure they're aware of these easements, or as much as I dislike it, some sort of requirement on the real estate community to make sure that individuals who are purchasing properties are aware of what exists on their land. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. We have about 10 minutes because I want to leave time for audience participation. So I'm going to move on to the next one. One of the reasons of doing a resolution is so that we can get the opportunity to have this conversation. And then, of course, you can always follow up with assembly members via email. So number 4, delete the current project NHS 004 that contains construction of a vehicular underpass at 92nd Scooter Avenue, and delete the Academy Drive Vanguard circulation improvements. Add a new project that mirrors project NHS 0004, but instead provides for non-vehicular freeway crossing at 92nd Avenue and Scooter Drive. I'm going to start with Mr. Weddleton and go the opposite direction this time.
Well, thanks. Let's start this with my famous statement, fear the grid. So this is not a new project for this body. I think Mr. Conson and I on the policy committee 5-6 years ago, and we and the body took off of the city bond the part of this project that was the city's responsibility at that point from Academy to Abbott to accommodate the state's project. So we could look at it a little bit better. A little bit later, we switched it to an AMAS project, which roughly doubled the cost for a variety of reasons. And I think it's on the AMAS plan now about $15-16 million. It's originally about $8. So the bigger picture is we had a kind of notion in this country, in the city, that to move increasing traffic over the decades, we have like a capillary system. You have neighborhood roads going to collectors, major collectors, arterials, major arterials, into highways, and that work beautifully to filter people where we want to go. But what happened is there are occasional little pinch points that get crowded, and we get frustrated, and we say, what can we do? So the thought process has changed. We say, let's go back to this traditional system of the grid, just like these nice little neighborhoods we used to have before there was much driving. And we have a grid system now, fear the grid, because we have roughly 1 mile crossings of the highway. Well, let's make that every half mile. And that's what we're working on now. We've done some of that. And then every quarter mile, and presumably every 1/8 mile. Now get out your map and draw lines, and every single neighborhood in this town will be having traffic dumped off the highway into it. And if you're like me, when I was on the assembly, one of the major complaints you have from constituents is not, I had to wait 3 minutes at a light, but speeding in my neighborhood drives people nuts. They want their homes to be safe, and we have speeding in every neighborhood. And this grid brings traffic, speeding traffic to every single neighborhood. Fear the grid. So this is part of that. This is part of that. Make it every half mile crossing under the highway. So should it be done? Now we're told that, well, this was in the plan 20 years ago, and it's too late to change it. Okay, we just can't change it. It's 20 years ago. No one knew that. It just said highway improvements diamond to O'Malley. I mean, who would know, reading that, you move on with your life, that it would mean this crossing would take Sleepy Academy Drive, which is most famous for the soccer team, playing on the fields in front of the church's home, and 1,000 cars a day to 10,000 cars a day. And the DOT project would drop those 10,000 cars at a stop sign right on Vanguard at Patriot Park. Patriot Park already suffers from lots of pass-through traffic going to Diamond, going to Fred Meyer. That's now. You dump 10,000 cars there. So what does that do? So now the city has to do, and it was some agreement somewhere, finish the project and build a connection, series from 2 lanes to 4, connection with a new traffic light, taking it from Academy at Vanguard to Abbott, and just adding to the cost to prevent that cut through traffic. So what can we do? This isn't really needed now. This was done 20 years ago before Tacotney Center. Land use changes are what really determine traffic. Tacotney Center dramatically changed demand or use of people shopping at the Diamond Center. The increase of facilities at the Abbott Town Center over those times, it decreased the need to go to the other side of the highway. I mean, it really has every service you need there, and it's increasing. We also have a plan for O'Malley, which is at the highway, which is really the premier crossing of the highway. That's where most of the traffic goes, to change it to the diverging diamond in the next couple of years, which should 50% more traffic. I mean, you get a lot more capacity off of those. So the need for this project to take pressure off of the crossing of Diamond Abbott at the highway is dramatically less. It's not, I live there, so I cross through that, and it's just not the bottleneck it used to be even, 10 years ago. So the need isn't there. So what can we do? Well, we have pedestrian crossings are needed because it is a nightmare to be a pedestrian crossing underneath the highway at Abbott Diamond. This could suit that. We've done that in other places. We raised the Seward Highway at Campbell Creek so that we could have a crossing there a few years ago, and that's been very popular. This is done. I know Eagle River Road has a pedestrian crossing under it. Let's make this a pedestrian crossing. Save a lot of money. You don't have to do the roundabouts. You don't have to buy the right-of-way that destroyed the soccer games that were played for decades in front of the church. So we don't lose as much, and the cost drops dramatically, and we have what is a very much needed pedestrian crossing from a very somewhat high density neighborhood, Patriot Park, Independence Park, and so on. So I think this is a good thing. We may be told we've already addressed this at the policy committee level. We have, but it needs to be addressed again and again because this change makes sense. We need to do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Rowland. Mr. Van Ho.
Yes, Todd Van Hove, DOT Planning. So I won't speak about the majority of the issues on here, just specifically what you have in front of you, which is basically canceling a project. You literally can't cancel half of a project. You cancel the project or you don't. And I will tell you that in DOT land, since this is our project and our funding, the major part of my job is to advocate for money for Anchorage area in the central region. The state's divided into 3 regions. We here in the central region. I will tell you that anytime you can't, first of all, I'll say that this is the only project we have on the books in Anchorage for DOT. We used to spend upwards of $100 million a year in the municipality. This is the only project we have. We haven't had any new projects for several years. It's DOT's decision or lack of decision, but it's their discussion to prevent projects from being added to the Anchorage Bowl and added to the central region in the majority of where the population resides. We develop criteria every time, just very similar to what the TIP does to score projects. Our process is much slower than the TIP. Mr. Welton said this project's been around for 20 years. I mean, it can take us anywhere from 8 to 10 years from a project initiation just to get it put in the plan. And then design is potentially 6 to 10 years in design. So the timeline to develop these projects is enormous for us. And I'll also say that once you kill this project, this body, municipality of Anchorage, or the AMAT people have no say in where this money goes. This money goes right back to DOT, and DOT will basically say thank you and spend it somewhere else in the state. There's no guarantees you're ever going to get this money back anywhere in this city. And as I just stated, there's no other projects in the municipality right now for DOT. So not that DOT is a jobs program. I'm just saying as our process develops very slowly, a 10, 15, 20-year process is pretty common for significant projects like this.
Thank you. I had 2 members hop in the queue, and I presume they're for you. So we'll stop there. Mr. Constant?
I have to breathe deep because I have a long relationship with DOT. And I've seen my neighborhood whipped and beaten and abused, trashed, ignored, avoided, and then put on the back burner. 50 years later, we're still mired in a circumstance where, quote, that neighborhood will never amount to anything, has turned into a policy that nobody knows why or how it got there, but it continues to be perpetuated by DOT. That people in poverty continue to struggle because volumes and volumes of carbon are pumped into their residential neighborhoods that abut directly federal highway, that humans walk, that people are in wheelchairs being pushed up a federal highway. It's just an absolutely baffling scenario. It is just absolutely baffling. And I could just be filled with rage right now. Hearing DOT say, well, because you guys made decisions that are benefit to your neighborhoods, we don't play with you anymore. And I know what you're saying is I'd like to play with you, but the state doesn't want to because for whatever reason, they're not investing here. But really the sidebar is because you're hard to work with, because you demand that when your highway facilities abut residential neighborhoods, that your projects take into consideration the human beings that live there instead of just high density traffic flows at peak traffic times, period, full stop. When Mr. Weldon and I led the charge to remove that project, it was because DOT had decided they were going to push their project through Anchorage on the backs of the municipal taxpayer, because they were taking their money and spending it somewhere else. And we were going to spend $20 to $25 million of bond money for a road that nobody wanted, that was going to have impacts on places where people live, that the state refused to contemplate because of its mission to run cars faster, denser, more efficiently, so we could save everybody 30 seconds on their commute every day by spending billions of dollars doing the same thing over and over again. Let's reiterate the same model, the same process, the same path, and the same plan. So when you hear people in the municipality of Anchorage choking on carbon and choking on bad policy, and not really even balking at this idea that, yeah, DOT doesn't even spend any money here because they don't really like to do the work.
Can
I
you
think
wrap
it's-
up, Mr.
yes,
Constant,
but
so we can
no.
keep going? Thanks.
No, I'm here to say, that's like the argument of an abuser in an abusive relationship. If you don't take what we're giving you, we're going to give you less. That's the message that was just delivered here.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'd ask the chair to please let us extend a few minutes into the next work session if my colleagues are amenable to that. Mr. Van Holm, I think there's a sort of, I'm misunderstanding your language a little bit, because when you say that there are no DOT projects in Anchorage, when we hear updates from Mr. Young, for example, he describes what's happening along the Seward Highway right now. And those are tens of millions of dollars of projects that I thought was going through the DOT. So you have to sort of explain to me how that's not considered a DOT project. Maybe it's a federal project DOT works on, what have you. But so that's one question. My other question is, first a comment, then a question. My comment is, when you talk about the extremely long lead times for these projects, I think that speaks directly to what Mr. Weldon said. Maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there was a good need for this project, but clearly things have changed. I mean, Tacotinu, that I represent Tacotinu is a huge change. And even in the last 8 years, I mean, it's really, really expanded. There are new projects going in there all the time. And I think it has changed the patterns in this area. And so I'm sort of curious, what happens when you get 10 years down the road and now really fit the demand in that area anymore? Do you still go for the project anyway? And then I guess my last question is, I know that we don't work sort of directly with you, but imagine someone had a really close connection to the state legislature in the near future. How would that legislator work with you at DOT to make sure we don't have things like this going forward?
Well, first of all, reverse order. I think, we don't contact the legislative body, state legislative body ourselves, and we are kind of prevented from advocating to them. We encourage them to contact us so that we can answer their questions and give them information so that they can do their work. As far as the only other thing I want to correct, backing up a little bit further, Mr. Constant, is it's my understanding that DOT had always intended on building this project completely. It was the municipality that came to us and asked us to take that piece of Vanguard and Academy away from us and bond for it. It was included in the original project years and years and years ago. So, so then the municipality changed their mind 20 years later. And if you could rephrase your first question, please.
So I guess, sorry. The two questions are, you said that this is the only project in the Anchorage area, but it seems like there's an awful lot of construction happening on our highways and our major roads. So can you just explain that distinction to me?
Certainly. And thank you for that. I do stand corrected. Those are new projects that haven't gotten started yet. And what I was referring to is, as an example, as we score projects at DOT, we haven't had any new start projects in DOT since 2018 was the last time we actually scored projects, and those are just now getting administered into the STIP through Amendment 4, which we're talking about. And yes, I do stand corrected. The projects on the Seward Highway are part of Anchorage. And those are, even though those are projects that have been generalized on the books for a long time, they were inserted by the governor, not by DOT, but that's neither here nor there. We're in favor of those, and those are ones that we're working on. But yes, those are in the acreage area.
Thank you. So just briefly, the next two fall in if there's additional, as I mentioned, that the TIP is a fiscally constrained program, and the only way to get additional money for the next two projects as contemplated by these amendments would be if the Academy Vanguard project was deleted. So Aaron, would you like to weigh in on like the idea of that, or that I'm incorrect?
I also want to add, if additional funding becomes available outside our regular sources, then that could be used to help fund that.
I was going to
Sorry,
get
just-
there, but yeah,
okay.
no, I saw you. I saw you wince. Okay, so I want to turn to the next one, which is to add corridor studies of A and C streets from 3rd Avenue to Tudor Road. I'm actually going to speak to this one because this one is one I have put forward. As many of you may have heard me speak about, there are a number of corridor studies in the current TIP. They include Tudor Road, Minnesota, Northern Lights, and Benson Boulevard. Feels like the only two missing are A and C, and it is really a matter of money. We just ran out of money to do those studies. So if additional funding were to become available, it would be nice to complete the package of road studies and potentially align those with additional things that are happening, particularly in the Midtown core, like the Midtown District Plan and the looking at the Midtown Tax Improvement District to kind of complete all of the studies that are happening. So would anyone like to discuss that?
And before we move on to the discussion, I do want to note that we really can only extend for 10 more minutes because we have another work session scheduled at 1 p.m. And I understand that since this is a consent agenda item, 10B1, the sponsors would like to hear from some members of the public here too. So just about 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
We'll be
max.
quick. Anyone want to discuss or weigh in on the AC corridor study? Yes, Mr. Constant.
I do support the idea, but I want to make sure that the advocates of the AC study recognize that it's in coordination with the Glen to Seward PEL, because there's long been a back and forth process between the two sections of the district, in which one section tends to get what they want, and then as soon as the improvements get to the edge of the other section, for some reason they always fall off the budget, and that neighborhood continues to be stuck in the mire, and it's miserable. And I could take you on a tour of the neighborhood to show you exactly where and how that's happened, but I want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, we're going to turn to the last one. Add 5th Avenue signalization as a funded project in the TIP if there are available funds, or as a project listed in the 4th year of the TIP. And for this one, actually, I have on the phone Shauna Toma. Shauna, would you like to speak to this, please?
Hello, thank you. And through the chair, this is Shauna Toma, THONA. And thank you, Assemblywoman Delta. The 5th and 6th Avenue signal lighting upgrades, both are important. I come today as a former, I worked in the Begich administration a little while ago, and but now I've been working on downtown projects with RVSA and with all the various groups that have been here, and all the businesses in town through the RVSA and the other organizations. And there's nothing that we've been talking about more than everything that's needed downtown, particularly safety and the upgrades needed to be able to move downtown forward for a couple of reasons. From the very simple reasons being all the safety upgrades are needed. The downtown is, people don't think it's safe right now. And we also want to attract investors and folks to build housing and reinvest some of the commercial aspects we know we need to rebuild downtown and move us out of these last few tough years. And we're on the, we are on the way, but we have to do these really important city investments right now. So this should go forward. We know that it takes some change and it also takes some leadership. We do need to be nimble when it comes to projects. We know back from I bring up the former administration time because we too we inherited projects that were already on the way, had been planned and designed, and we're moving through the process, but we're forced to change them because the community's needs change and the community's appetite for those projects change, and they didn't like some of the design. They were way too aggressive, took up too much space, whatever they were. We heard all of it, and we did change them. We were able to work with state DOT and the federal government to make sure that we were able to reuse the funds in a different way. There's a way to do it, and we know that can be done at this point also.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Toma. Anyone else want to weigh in on the signalization? Yeah, Mr. Constant.
Is there a project definition somewhere?
Yeah, it was included in the whereas clauses.
Right. Nothing more than that, though.
I believe that is it, and that came out of the same definition that's used for the other signalization project. So there is a Fourth Avenue signalization, and I will admit that my resolves missed the Fifth and Sixth Avenue, so you'll see something coming for that change. My apologies.
Quick question to the department. Does that match your language for the Fourth Avenue? Or, I mean, the Fourth Avenue project has a pretty substantial definition, doesn't it?
It's a pretty generic definition that's captured with this whereas. I believe they
It's good
pulled
enough,
that
okay.
definition from here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Now I'd like to turn to hear from the members of the public who came really quick. We have probably time for one or two at most. If we could just use the microphone in front of Ms. Wilm so that everyone can hear you. 3 minutes, it'll be the standard 3 minutes. So please come on up because we're gonna run short on time.
Hi, my name is Emily Weiser. I just wanted to speak quickly in favor for changing that scooter underpass project as proposed in the amendment. It sounds like, we have funding and momentum, but that's not really a good reason to do a project that isn't needed and that will have harmful effects. I would also encourage adding a new project to do the bike ped crossing at that location because, as Mr. Weddleton was saying, we are really lacking those crossings for the highway at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thanks.
Thank you. My name's Amanda Moser, and I'm a member of the public. Thanks for the opportunity to talk today. I want to sort of speak broadly to this. For the past few years at the annual economic report that AEDC and Bill Pop present, he keeps mentioning the continuous outmigration of Anchorage residents, and very specifically millennials and Generation Z. These generations specifically select communities that they want to live, and then they find a job there. They're thoughtful about what they want from their community. They want a vibrant, livable space. And speaking of a member of this cohort, we want spaces designed for human connection. We want spaces that prioritize people and bikes and non-vehicular movement over vehicular movement. And I'm excited to see this shift in conversation that's happening with this proposed recommended changes to the AMATS tip. And I think, we've heard talk about the long wait on some of these projects. I'll say that there's been a big shift in thinking in the last 10 years. We talk more about the difference between streets and roads. Roads should be moving cars quickly. Streets should be a place for connection. They should be places that support commerce. They should be an environment where communities can connect and where folks can be on bikes or traveling by different modes. And so thank you for having this conversation. I'm really excited to see the corridor studies for A and C. I like to think about how I want to move about this community, and I often bike to work. And so I am one less car on the road, but I travel down that unprotected bike lane on A Street and semis pull up alongside me. And I am like thoughts and prayers on safety in that space because there is nothing between me and an 18-wheeler, but thoughts and prayers. And so I'm excited that these conversations are happening, and I'm going to be engaged because I want them to continue to happen. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your leeway, Madam Chair. I think we are all done.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel, and thank you all for being here today for this work session. And with that, we are adjourned. We will reconvene in a few minutes for our next work session, which is scheduled for 1 p.m.